In 1996, the FBI apprehended a man that eluded capture for nearly 2 decades. His homemade letter bombs struck fear across the United States, mostly targeting airlines and universities, earning him the nickname the Unabomber. All told, he killed 3 people and injured 23 more. He took great care not to leave a trace of evidence, and unlike other serial murderers, he didn't seek glory and fame for his killings. If it wasn't for his manifesto, the publication that outlined his disdain of technology in modern society, he may never have been caught. After his arrest, the world was shocked that this backwards-living hermit living without electricity or running water could be the man responsible for such sophisticated killings. Today, we explore this man, the domestic terrorist and lone wolf killer, Ted Kaczynski. On May 22, 1942, Theodore John Kaczynski was born in Chicago to blue-collar, second-generation Polish Americans Theodore, Turk, and Wanda Kaczynski. 7 years later, the Kaczynskis had a second son who was called David. Little is written about Ted's early years, except for one incident that may have been the impetus to the boy's tendency to alienate himself, according to his mother and brother. When Ted was a 9-month-old baby, he developed a severe case of hives that required him to be quarantined for 10 days in the hospital. Afterwards, Wanda reported it took a long time for her son to return to his normal, happy self. Worried about his shyness and social development, Wanda claimed she considered putting her young son into studies for autistic children, but ultimately decided against it. One neighbor remembered him as strictly a loner. When Ted was 10 years old, the Kaczynski family moved out of Chicago to the southwest suburb of Evergreen Park. At the time, this was a neighborhood predominantly made up of Irish people, Italians, Czechs, and Poles. Ted's parents would later say that the move out of Chicago was so that the boys could enjoy a better class of friends. At Evergreen Park, Ted thrived and seemed like a normal kid to most people, except for one exception: his remarkable intellect. In the 5th grade, Ted was labeled a genius after he scored 167 on an IQ test. His high marks put him in the same IQ range as theoretical physicists Stephen Hawking and Albert Einstein. Ted skipped 6th grade, and then at the urging of school administrators, his junior year of high school as well. Ted would later claim that his parents pushed him too hard, and being younger and smaller than his classmates made it difficult for him to fit in with his peers. Still, he had made some friends, and he was the ringleader of an outclassed clique known as the Briefcase Boys at Evergreen Park Community High School. Ted was especially adept in mathematics and science and spent hours working out advanced problems. In high school, he joined the chess, biology, German, and mathematics clubs. He played trombone in the marching band, explored the music of Bach and Vivaldi, and wrote compositions for himself, his younger brother David, and their father to perform at home. His physics teacher, Robert Rippey, described him as honest, ethical, and sociable. Ted attended summer school and was able to graduate at the age of just 15. That year, he was one of 5 national merit finalists at his high school. One former classmate said Ted was never really seen as a person, as an individual personality. He was always regarded as a walking brain, so to speak. Ted seemed aware of how others viewed him. He later said, "By the time I left high school, I was definitely regarded as a freak by a large segment of the student body, and he felt a gradual increasing amount of hostility from the other children." In 1958, Ted was accepted into Harvard, and as part of the recommendation letter, his high school counselor, Lois Skillen, wrote, "I believe Ted has one of the greatest contributions to make to society. He is reflective, sensitive, and deeply conscious of his responsibilities to society. His only drawback is a tendency to be rather quiet in his original meetings with people, but most adults on our staff and many people in the community who are mature find him easy to talk to and very challenging intellectually. He has a number of friends among high school students and seems to influence them to think more seriously." During this period of his life, Ted held immense promise for his future, but he may not have been ready to leave home. One friend remembers urging Kaczynski's father not to let the boy go, arguing he's too young, too immature, and Harvard too impersonal. As an incoming Harvard freshman, Kaczynski was 16 years old. The health service doctor who interviewed him as part of the routine screening process noted, "Good impression created. Attractive, mature for age, relaxed. Talks easily, fluently, and pleasantly. Likes people, then gets on well with them." Being among the youngest and brightest freshmen, Ted was housed at 8 Prescott Street, a 3-story Victorian house just outside of Harvard Yard. That year, the Dean of Freshmen, Skiddy Von Stad Jr., decided to use the residence specifically for less mature boys who needed a more intimate, nurturing environment. It was a place where those boys would not get lost in the larger, impersonal dorms. Some have come to the conclusion that while the Dean's plan was well-intentioned, putting all the fragile young men together had the opposite effect. It isolated them, making adjusting to Harvard even more difficult. One student living at 8 Prescott later said, "It was not unusual to spend all one's time in one's room and then rush out the door to library or class." After his arrest, Kaczynski's housemate, Gerald Burns, wrote that he was as normal as I am now. It was just hard on him because he was much younger than his classmates. Despite the adversity, he took up swimming and wrestling, played trombone, and picked up basketball. He also had a few friends. Kaczynski's sophomore year marked the beginning of, in his words, the worst experience of my life. Together with 21 undergraduate students, Kaczynski was a participant in an unethical study conducted by Henry A. Murray, the Harvard professor and psychologist best known for pioneering personality tests. Before Harvard, Murray had been a colonel in the U.S. Army and an agent for the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, which later became known as the CIA. According to his colleagues at OSS, Murray was obsessed with mind control and used LSD among other drugs to determine how to brainwash subjects. There is no evidence to suggest Murray used LSD in his experiments with Kaczynski, though. The study was officially named Multiform Assessments of Personality Development Among Gifted College Men, and its purpose was to measure how the students reacted under stress. Subjects were told that they would be debating personal philosophies with other students and writing essays detailing their beliefs and their aspirations. The essays were then turned over to anonymous attorneys who conducted vehement, sweeping, and personally abusive interrogations. The participants wore electrodes to monitor their physiological responses, and the sessions were also filmed. Later, subjects' expressions of rage during the interrogations were repeatedly played back to them. Some sources have suggested that Murray's study was part of the federal government's research on mind control known as Project MKUltra. Author Alston Chase questioned whether the purposely brutalizing psychological experiment contributed to the making of Kaczynski the Unabomber. However, by no means can Kaczynski's bombing campaign be laid at Harvard's door, though his staunch anti-technological views are recognized in part to Harvard's curriculum in the late 1950s. Kaczynski earned a Bachelor of Arts from Harvard in 1962, finishing with a 3.12 GPA. In his own words, Ted later recalled his experience overall at Harvard as a tremendous thing for me. He thrived on the hard work and self-discipline and became enthusiastic about willpower. Kaczynski enrolled at the University of Michigan in 1962 at the age of 20 and spent the next 5 years of his life in Ann Arbor. He earned his master's degree in 1964 and his doctoral degree in 1967. Michigan, it was not his first choice school. He would have preferred the University of California at Berkeley or the University of Chicago. He was accepted to all three, but Michigan offered Kaczynski a teaching position and a financial aid package. At Michigan, Ted received $2,310 annually, roughly the equivalent of about $19,000 today. During his time there, he specialized in geometric function theory and completed his dissertation, Boundary Functions, to great acclaim. His doctoral advisor, Alan Shields, called it the best I have ever directed, winning the Sumner Byron Myers Prize for Michigan's best mathematics dissertation of the year. Kaczynski published 5 journal articles based on it, 2 while at Michigan and 3 after. Despite Kaczynski's academic success, he earned 12 A's and 5 B's over 18 courses, and his students rating him as an above-average instructor, he did not enjoy Michigan. He thought the standards were wretched, and the professors were mostly sloppy, careless, and poorly organized. As he said, most instructors and most students did only what they had to do. There was no interest or enthusiasm or even any sense of responsibility about doing a good job. The mathematics department was enthusiastic about him, but many others didn't seem to notice him. Underneath the quiet and studious demeanor, no one suspected his rage was building, his ideology forming, and it was at this point that he apparently made the decision to start killing. Kaczynski later said, "I thought I will kill, but I will make at least some effort to avoid detection so that I can kill again." According to Sally Johnson, who conducted a psychological profile on Kaczynski during his court proceedings, it was during his 4th year at Michigan that he began to fantasize about breaking away from society. She wrote, He decided that he would do whatever he always wanted to do, to go to Canada, to take off in the woods with a rifle and try to live off the country. If it doesn't work, and if I can get back to civilization before I starve, then I will come back here and kill someone I hate. Kaczynski also shared with Johnson that he suffered from nightmares and sexual repression during this time. He began fantasizing about being female and reasoned the only way he would ever be able to touch a woman was simply to become one. Kaczynski went so far as even to go to the university's health center to discuss a possible sex change, but he had a sudden change of heart in the waiting room. He shared with Johnson his feelings of humiliation and of disgust, and then suddenly felt better when he thought about murdering the psychiatrist. Just then, there came a major turning point in his life, he later told Johnson. Like a phoenix, I burst from the ashes of my despair to a glorious new hope. In late 1967, Kaczynski became the youngest assistant professor of mathematics in the history of UC Berkeley. He was 25 years old. He stayed on for less than 2 years, teaching undergraduate classes in geometry and calculus, before a sudden and unexpected resignation. No one knew at the time that Kaczynski never intended to launch his career at Berkeley. He only wanted to earn enough money to fulfill his plan of checking out of the modern world and moving into the wilderness. By the mid to late 1960s, Kaczynski had concluded that mathematics was too close to the evils of technology, which he despised. In 1971, Kaczynski wrote an essay, and it began, "It is argued that continued scientific and technical progress will inevitably result in the extinction of individual liberty. It was imperative that this juggernaut be stopped," Kaczynski went on. "This could not be done by simply popularizing a certain libertarian philosophy, unless that philosophy is accompanied by a program of concrete action." After leaving Berkeley, Kaczynski lived with his parents for 2 years before building his remote cabin outside of Lincoln, Montana, on lands that he purchased with his brother's help. The cabin was a simple structure with no electricity or running water. At first, he survived working odd jobs, using an old bicycle to get to and from the town. He taught himself survival skills such as tracking game and edible plant identification, as well as organic farming. He visited the library and read classic works in their original languages. In 1975, he started to see the impact of real estate development on the Montana wilderness, and it enraged him. He had considered living peacefully, but now all he wanted was to get back at the system by acts of revenge and carry out his earlier fantasies of killing. From 1978 to 1995, Kaczynski mailed or hand-delivered a series of homemade bombs of increasing sophistication. He took great care not to leave any fingerprints behind, and he purposefully left misleading clues to confuse the authorities. His first bomb was meant for Buckley Crist, a professor of materials engineering at Northwestern University. Crist was suspicious of the package and called campus police. Officer Terry Maker opened it, and the package exploded, injuring Maker's left hand. A second bomb, in May of 1979, was sent again to Northwestern. This time, it was a graduate student, John Harris, who suffered minor cuts and burns when it exploded. Kaczynski's next bomb was intended to blow up a Boeing 727, American Airlines Flight 444, traveling from Chicago to Washington, D.C. The bomb was placed in the cargo hold, and thankfully, a faulty timing mechanism prevented it from igniting. It did release smoke, forcing an emergency landing, and authorities stated that it would have had enough power to obliterate the plane had it exploded. It was at this point that the FBI opened the Unabomber case and led a task force made up of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives and U.S. Postal Inspection Service. Analysis on the bomb materials proved fruitless. Kaczynski's handmade explosives were made with scrap materials found almost anywhere. 4 more bombs caused unsuspecting victims burns and cuts from 1980 to 1985. The first serious injury, though, it occurred on May 15, 1985 at Berkeley, when graduate students and a captain in the U.S. Air Force, John Hauser, opened the package. He lost 4 fingers and vision in one of his eyes. This bomb was followed by 2 more bombs in 1985, and then on December the 11th of that year, the blast from a nail and splinter-loaded bomb killed Sacramento computer store owner Hugh Scrutton. This was the first of 3 Unabomber casualties. Kaczynski targeted another computer store owner, Gary Wright, in 1987, who suffered nerve damage when the bomb went off. After nearly a decade, the FBI was nowhere close to catching the Unabomber. But then, all of a sudden, he stopped sending bombs for a period of 6 years, from 1987 to 1993. The authorities simply thought he was gone. They surmised he died by accidental death or natural causes, or maybe he had a change of heart. Kaczynski's reign of terror, it wasn't over though. He mailed 4 more bombs from 1993 to 1995, murdering 2 more people, including Thomas J. Mosser, an advertising executive, and Gilbert Brent Murray, a timber industry lobbyist. His 2 other bombs severely wounded and disfigured David Gerlenter, a computer science professor at Yale University, and Charles Epstein, a geneticist at the University of California, San Francisco. Kaczynski's bombs were often stamped with the letters FC, and the FBI noted the theme of nature and trees, since he often included bits of bark and branches in his explosive packages. In 1995, Kaczynski contacted the media, blackmailing the New York Times and Washington Post into publishing his 35,000-word essay, Industrial Society and His Future. The media dubbed this the Unabomber Manifesto, and in exchange for its release, word for word, he would desist from terrorism. In his manifesto, Kaczynski asserts that the downfall of the human race can be attributed to the Industrial Revolution and modern technological society. He claimed widespread psychological suffering has taken place because of technology's destabilizing effect, and he argues people spend too much time engaged in useless pursuits such as the consumption of entertainment. Our society tends to regard as a sickness any mode of thought or behavior that is inconvenient for the system. And this is plausible because when an individual can't fit into the system, it causes pain to the individual as well as problems for the system. Thus, the manipulation of an individual to adjust him to the system is seen as a cure for a sickness and therefore as good. Kaczynski saw the only way of returning to wild nature and freedom was to destroy progress, which he believed was entirely possible. The manifesto's reception was regarded as a work of genius by some and entirely sane by others. It has been compared to Aldous Huxley's Brave New World and George Orwell's 1984. James Q. Wilson wrote that it was a carefully reasoned, artfully written paper. If it is the work of a madman, then the writings of many political philosophers, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Tom Paine, Karl Marx, are scarcely more sane. Following the publication of the manifesto, David Kaczynski and his wife Linda noticed chilling familiarities between his brother's letters and an earlier essay that Ted wrote. For 3 weeks, they pored over years of correspondence looking for telltale clues before contacting the authorities. Once convinced the Unabomber could be David's brother, they hired an attorney who contacted a criminal profiler to analyze the letters and contact the FBI. At the time, agents were actively following up on over 2,000 tips, and a recluse living in the backwoods of Montana didn't seem to match their expectations. Not until expert linguists analyzed the letters and the essay and determined that they were certainly the same man. FBI agents arrested Kaczynski on April 3, 1996 at his cabin, where he was found in an unkempt state. A search of his cabin revealed a cache of bombing components, 40,000 handwritten journal pages that included bomb-making experiments, descriptions of the Unabomber crimes, and 1 live bomb ready for the mailing. They also found what appeared to be the original typed manuscripts of Industrial Society and Its Future. By this point, the Unabomber had been the target of the most expensive investigation in FBI history. A federal grand jury indicted Kaczynski in April of 1996 on 10 counts of illegally transporting, mailing, and using bombs, and 3 counts of murder. Kaczynski's defense had attempted to use the insanity defense in order to avoid the death penalty, but Kaczynski refused. He tried to fire his attorneys and attempted suicide by hanging on January the 9th. On the judge's order, Kaczynski underwent a psychological evaluation by Sally Johnson, who gave him a provisional diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. Regardless, he was determined to be fit to stand trial and instead pled guilty on all charges on January the 22nd, 1998, in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. At the sentencing, Kaczynski displayed no emotion or remorse for his heinous crimes. The contents of his cabin were sold at auction and netted $232,000 for Kaczynski's victims. Today, Ted Kaczynski is serving 8 consecutive life sentences in a maximum security prison in Florence, Colorado, where he spends 23 hours a day in his cell. He maintains an oddly active connection to many people on the outside through letters and contacts the media with regularity. The Labadie collection, correspondence since his arrest with over 400 people, is housed at the University of Michigan's Special Collections Library. Further, his Montana cabin, seized by the US government, is currently on display at the Museum in Washington, D.C. So I really hope you enjoyed that Biographics video. If you did, don't forget to subscribe to this channel for brand new biographies every Monday and Thursday. Also, I've got another channel, it's called Top 10s. On that channel, as you might have guessed from the name of it, we look at all sorts of interesting top 10 lists. You can check it out through the link on the screen now, but if you're looking for something else to watch right now, why not check out a biography from the archives, or indeed a top 10s video over there on the right. And as always, thank you for watching.